So I'm going to welcome back, as we like to say, to the digital stage, Phil and the Chasey team, who have been tremendous with us, not only live when we were doing this in Manchester, but all throughout this week as we've been delivering Shared Services Week Digi as our chairman for the entire conference, capturing the key takeaways. So in case you missed any points, that type of thing, here's one great summary that you can add to your report and share with your team. And on that note, welcome back to the digital stage, Phil Searle, CEO and founder of Chasey Partners and our chairman for 2017 Shared Services Week Digital Europe. Phil, over to you.
Thank you very much, Rochelle, and thank you to everyone on the line who's either attended live sessions or is listening to this as recorded afterwards. It's been a great pleasure and honor for me and for Robert and Daniel from the Chasey team to be part of these sessions over the last 3 days and to be part of this inaugural digital event in Europe to follow up on the Manchester event. It's been a great 3 days and a great opportunity to extend the learnings and the development and sharing of best practices that goes on at these events. I'd also like to thank Rochelle and Elisa for your support, and to SSO for setting this up. Rochelle and Elisa, it's been great working with you and a really smooth 3 days, so thank you very much for your support, both of you. That's been great. And from my own team, I'd like to thank Sarah Yee, who's been supporting us behind the scenes. So with that said, I'm going to do the wrap-up now. So we have a few slides, and just as a reminder of some of the topics we've covered over the last 3 days, we've talked about some of the latest trends and opportunities in shared services, outsourcing, offshoring technology. We've discussed some areas where shared services and GBS, et cetera, have added strategic value and value-added services and gone up the value chain through things like supporting the C-suite, data analytics, et cetera. We've talked about some of the very latest developments in global business services and best practices in global process ownership. We've talked quite a lot about technology and digitization, and specifically robotics, intelligent automation, and data analytics. We talked generally about digitization and automating, optimizing your shared services. And amongst that, we've talked about ERP, cloud, software as a service, etc. And we talked a lot about some of the roles of leaders, etc., and discussion on the future workforce. So those are some of the topics we've discussed. And specifically within the sessions, we've had 10 great sessions over 3 days. With a range of excellent speakers, many of whom you will have heard it before, and most of whom you will have seen in Manchester for those of you that were there, and for those of you that weren't, had the opportunity to hear them over these 3 days. The first session was run by Gary Critchley, Head of UK Shared Services at National Grid, and some of the key takeaways for me, and I'm sure you all have your own, but was that the GBS, or the Global Business Services model, has really been a strategic enabler for National Grid's strategic plans and support, including, and very importantly, supporting a recent and significant divestiture out of the National Grid business. And Gary was talking to us about how they separated the GBS structure over a very short timescale, but used some of the best practices involved, and then how they extracted that value for the new divested business, and then refocused the existing GBS structure on adding value to the go-forward National Grid. It was a really interesting story. As part of that, he was talking about the sort of focus on quality and fixing problems, and the build, fix, continuous improvement, and scope expansion and new portfolios. It's a very interesting story. But he also emphasized, and this is a key takeaway, the need to retrain and upskill the teams in the GBS, both the leaders and team members, as GBS evolves and moves up the value chain. The second session we had was a panel discussion talking about the specific GPO, or role of global process ownership, which has one of been topics around best practices in shared services for many, many years. And actually, to be honest with you, in many organizations has been a challenge. So we had the opportunity to hear from Rob Cohen, formerly Vice President of Enterprise and Technology Solutions at Unilever, and Joanne Gavigan, Director of GPO Accounts Report at Unisys. And some of the key takeaways for me from that session with Joanne and Rob was it, in terms of the role of GPO, it's probably best if it sits, at least initially, within the GBS or Shared Services organization itself, if one has already been established. If it's not been established, and you're moving towards that, then it needs to be part of effectively the project team setup. I would add that from my own experience, the GPO, Global Process Ownership is a goal that needs to be achieved over time. And whether you can truly have a GPO that's global up front from the start is often a challenge, and you may end up with some subset from a process perspective or regional GPOs. But the goal is to move towards GPO, and the best practice examples of this do have these very effective GPO structures. Turning back to this session with Rob and Joanne, they also talked very importantly and highlighted the importance of senior level sponsorship for the GPO model and for the role of the GPO. Because without that senior level sponsorship, it's difficult for the GPOs, who tend to be restricted in number, to drive through the change and get the support, because there's often pushback at local cultures and local systems and processes, and even fiefdoms that can push against this global approach to process ownership. Another key factor that was discussed was the process transparency. In fact, it was stated as one of the key factors, or even the key factor, to making the role of GPO successful. And in turn, turning to the role of the GPO leader themselves, they need to have a good understanding of end-to-end process, and truly end-to-end process. So procure to pay, record to report, hire to retire, and in terms of the customer experience, from receipt of request through to processing completion request, all those areas really need to be thought about end to end, and that's a key role of a global process owner. And they also need the ability to support change management, because the change to global processes requires change management, which links back to my point earlier on. And then the GPO linking to senior level sponsorship needs to have the right level of authority to act, supported by great relationship skills. So those are some key takeaways from Joanne and Rob that I thought were very, very helpful too. Okay, and then we move to the third session, so I'll just let the screen refresh there, which is actually the session that was run by myself and Daniel Lawrence from Chazy Partners, and we covered some of the latest trends in shared services and specifically did a drill down on RPA, robotic process automation. One of my key points I made is that shared services has been around for over 30 years now, since the mid-1980s, and it's been successful because it's been a significant driver of value, but really importantly, it's evolved. And we've moved from single functional to multifunctional, limited technology to extensive technology, country-based to regional to global, specific processes to end-to-end process. I could go on, but it's evolved, but around that has always been this focus on the four critical success factors of people, process, client, technology. No one is more important than the other. They're all important, especially the focus on the internal client. But the level and the running order, if you want to put it that way, can change from company to company. And I'll come back to that a little bit, because we heard a little bit about that from Cindy's presentation as well. In terms of some of the trends, offshoring, which has been a significant trend over the last 10 years, is less of a trend than it used to be, but it's definitely still relevant. So companies are still offshoring for sure. So the outsourcers are still hiring overseas, but it's less of a trend than it used to be, and less of an emphasis. And there's more bringing back certain service provision onshore or nearshore specifically as well. This is due to a range of reasons, including business requirements needing closer to business, moving up the value chain, new technology requiring some of that to be more in-house than out-house, for example, RPA, some of the basic economics, and dare I say it, some even the politics, with a less of a desire to move offshore. Although if anybody asks me this question, it is ultimately all about the economics and less about the politics in business. And then there's been some significant growth in the public sector. I talked a little bit about that. Shared services is a huge trend in the public sector, in higher education and government, and I did touch on that during the session. In terms of RPA, just moving on to there, it is essential when moving forward RPA to get the foundations of an operating government frameworks in place before embarking on the RPA journey, and it's important to really treat it as an end-to-end project, including stakeholders and understanding expectations, and have a proper global process ownership aspect of that too. So RPA is not just a point-in-time solution. It needs to be part of a wider framework with proper governance, proper control, business case, in stakeholder engagement, change management, etc., just like you would expect. So that was our session. The fourth session was run by Tobias Unger from Siemens, and it was really focused on technology, and specifically some of the new technologies. And what I really liked Tobias's comment about RPA and other these artificial intelligence, etc., being a new third layer of technology. And specifically, he called it a user layer, and I put that in capitals here. The other layers, just for FYI, the first layer being ERP, and the second layer being BPM, Business Process Management, with the third layer being a user layer. And he also talked about it's very important to have an integrated approach to this, to consider all three layers and not just consider the RPA user layer in isolation. Another great takeaway for me from Tobias was don't fall for the sunk cost argument. You must understand what you've already invested in, because you have to leverage that. You have to leverage your existing technology landscape, your existing infrastructure, security, data, integrity, etc. You can't just assume that RPA is going to come in and make past technology investments irrelevant. It is not. In fact, it needs to build on those. Another key takeaway for me from Tobias is that ERP is a tops-down driven initiative, but RPA tends to be more bottoms-up, which is driven by more local demands. And this is an interesting final point he made. The more disparate and more unintegrated your existing technology landscape, the more robots you may want to and need to deploy. But again, that isn't necessarily a good thing. If you have very disparate, disintegrated technology, you might want to sort that out, source, and deal with that from an end-to-end process and technology perspective, rather than try and quick fix through RPA. So the point there is RPA is an appropriate technology, but it's not a quick fix. It's not an answer for all problems. You still need to think across the whole enterprise and your end-to-end and your technology solution. That's a very, very important point. Moving on. Okay, so in our next session, which was talked about, again, Rob Cohen joined us again, and he talked about some of the acceleration to integrated business services, including through digitization. And some of his key points, building on some of the stuff we said already, is make sure we focus on the end user first, and then all else follows. Another key point he made is if you can't measure it, you can't improve it, which is actually a mantra that's been around for a long time, but it's really very, very important in GBS and business services. And he also mentioned another key point was that digital is and will be a key enabler for further expansion for GBS to ensure what he called radical simplification to support delighting the user and including more emphasis on analytics and insights, which links to the whole trend in GBS to be more about the end user, more about analytics, more about moving up the value chain. Our next session was with John Dickens and Jeremy Orr from British Gas Centrica, focused specifically on RPA and the centre of expertise that they are setting up and set up there at Centrica. It was a really interesting discussion. Again, linking back to some of the other points we've heard, they stressed that RPA is more of a tactical solution. It delivers efficiencies within existing back office processes and technology framework. And I've already touched on that, but this is really important from their session. An interesting other point made that robots do get sick. You can't just assume that you have a robot and everything's fine, because robots work within a technology and a process environment, and they also require maintenance. So don't think they're a silver bullet. Linking back to some previous points, they also talked about if you consolidate your processes and basically improve end-to-end, you may not need robots. So robots should not be seen as a nirvana solution. And go for the 80-20, 20% of the effort to achieve 80% of the benefit. Next session was with Cindy Gallagher, Senior Vice President of GBS, and she focused on making sure you do what's right for you and not necessarily what other people might want you to do. Always ask the question, why? Again, linking back to some previous comment, place customer experience and outputs, I would say, and outcomes at the heart of what you do and how you deliver it. And then I would say a really important way, we talked about those critical success factors earlier on. It was interesting as Cindy talked through in approaching their transformation, they actually fit the sequence around from a typical perspective and started with technology, followed by process, and then people, but critically with customer being at the heart of this all the way through. Now, I think with this new technology, cloud-based technology, digitalization, RPA, you can actually use that as more of a significant enabler for change, and therefore I can see why that would be very important in GBS. But again, just as a reminder, remember it is all about the four critical success factors and not just any one. Then we had the panel discussion with Tobias and Julie, which was held this morning. And in that session, there was a discussion on digital technology impact is accelerating the move to value-added services. So again, linking back to previous comments, allowing organizations to leapfrog into new areas more rapidly. Somebody asked me this the other day, are we in an industrial revolution or industrial evolution with this new technology? I think it's probably somewhere between the two. We mustn't overemphasize the technology because the trend has been there for the last 15 to 20 years, but there's definitely a huge opportunity to leverage some of this latest technology in GBS and to do exactly what it says here, leapfrog into new areas. One of the other key points that were made in this session was the data strategy is a key to evolution of the GBS. And regarding talent development, skills building, skills training, skills development is key across the entire organization at all levels in the GBS, leadership, supervisory, management and supervisory, and at the process level, all critical. And if we move through to the very last session that we had, just let that slide come through, before our closing session we've just experienced, that was the session with George and Dan discussing HR technology enablement and making HR tech for you. Some interesting takeaways for me is change management is critical, which is not a surprise, but very, very important stress. With cloud-based solutions, responsibility for security has moved from IT to HR and more broadly to the function service line. That was really interesting. We discussed security, we discussed data privacy, and we discussed all the issues around that, especially with new regulations in EMEA and elsewhere, and the critical importance of security. And really, HR has had to take ownership, and other functions will need to do the same. As George said, do not do HR for HR. Make sure this links to the business needs and the needs of your internal customer. Again, linking back to some of the things we talked about. And George talked about Levi's moving into more of a retail business model, which is really fascinating. And having to focus their technology on that and having a different solution base or emphasis for wholesale parts of their business versus retail. And the final point on here, I would say that new HR and specifically cloud-based solutions has helped drive greater integration between HR services and processes. And both George and specifically Dan talked about this and emphasized this, and that headcount data and payroll feeds are more integrated than they used to be as well. And this is all helping, but it still remains a challenge, but better than before. We then talked about the single source of truth, and the single source of truth becoming more of a reality and less of a vague goal, but more of a reality with this new technology. So with that, those are my personal key takeaways from the sessions over the last 3 days. Again, I'd like to thank all the speakers and presenters, all the panel members, everyone who joined us over the last 3 days. It's been my pleasure to have led this session, and we look forward to doing it again. And thank you very much for your time. And with that, I'll hand it back to Rochelle to close out the 3 days. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Phil. Very, very good information. Certainly, I think everyone can get some useful nuggets and some true insight, both from the industry expertise that you and your team have added, Phil, as well as the wonderful job that you've done to capture the key takeaways from each of the sessions. So be sure to keep those in mind when you get the note with the digital gift bag, when you can link to the actual live, the recorded versions of the sessions and the slides. I just want to give a very special thank you to the entire Chazy team. It's really been a great team effort, as Phil has mentioned, behind the scenes and live, making sure that everything went smoothly, that they captured it, and that we got the most from each of the speakers, and that all of you attending, most importantly, as our customers, got the most out of each session. So a big thanks for that. And also, just to highlight again, in the digital gift bag, be sure to look for a couple of bonus items that you'll have in there, the videos that we talked about in today's session, some white papers that will be useful, and some analytics that we all like to absorb related to some of the topics such as GPO and intelligent automation that we've been talking about over the course of the last 3 days. So it's been a wonderful week. I really do appreciate everyone who has joined live. Special thank you to those of you who are listening to the recorded version. My sincere thanks to the entire Chazy team as our chairman and supporting chairman team. And with that, I can officially say Shared Services Digital Week Europe is a wrap. And that concludes today's webcast.